Thank you very much indeed for inviting me here today. I've got varied experience here in the UK, even though we are no longer in the European Union. I'm not going to express my sadness about that. I've done that far too many times. But even within our own country, we have devolved nations who do things differently. So I have experience of making patient submissions to NICE for pancreas cancer therapies, and also to the Scottish Health Technologies Group, and both are very, very different experiences. NICE was, as Antonella alluded to, actually included very much a tick box exercise for patient group involvement. We even spent quite a lot of money on patient surveys and also time and effort internally to produce submissions for NICE, and were really given lip service to the amount of contributions we were actually able to be involved in. And that's the kind of thing I would like not to happen in the EU HTA process. In Scotland, totally different. In the Scottish Health Technologies Group, they accept patient organisation submissions, not just from national charities such as ours, but from local patient groups. So they don't mind whether the organisation is large or small, and they also will accept and encourage involvement from individual patients as well. What they really do well is they provide really good support to those organisations who would like to contribute, and they will even commit staff time to supporting patients and organisations. They will take time on the phone. They've got a very good section of their website which is very, very clear and in plain English, so people can understand what the process is, and they lead you through the step through the process, step by step, and that's really a model that could be potentially utilised and maybe made better through the EU HTA process, so that the involvement of patients is not just that ticking box exercise, but is actually a very useful part of the process. Because after all, patient organisations tend to know the disease area and how their patients are affected, sometimes a little bit better than even the oncologists who perhaps are treating them. And that's including the impact of technologies and treatments on their quality of life, not just those medical outcomes. And it's gathering that evidence of those quality of life issues, which is so important. I think also in the process, we need to have not just a guide to how the process works, but also information on what to expect if you're going to be attending sessions. If you're in a face-to-face meeting, what's going to happen as you go through the door? You're going to be in this room, these people are going to be here, and so that it really removes some of the smoke and mirrors and the mystique about the whole process, and makes it a lot more accessible for people to be able to contribute. The issues that I am concerned about with this process is that while I'm really excited to hear that the EU institutions have understood that the HTA process and assessments can't be made without patient involvement, and also we can as patient organisations help ensure that there is proper collation of useful data. But I'm really concerned that when we get down to the nitty-gritty, that the patient involvement will not be as valuable as it perhaps could be. And I think we need to even go further back, and I've said this many times in different forums, is to make sure that patient group and patient involvement in the process of trial design from the very beginning is as important as from the other end when you're assessing a therapy, because if we're not collecting the right data within that trial setting, then the evidence for how these therapies are affecting patients, not just physically but maybe mentally and also their quality of life, is not adequately recorded, and therefore if we don't have that evidence, then it's very difficult to use anecdotal evidence to try and make a basis for adopting that technology. We're in a strange position here in the UK, and very much going to be voyeurs, I think, in this process, except for my own personal involvement with Pancreatic Cancer Europe. It's because, you know, we're no longer participating in the EU legislative process. And I think here in the UK, it's unlikely currently that we would be applying the EU HTA regulation. But I would hope, and let's see with the last couple of days, with, if you know about Rishi Sunak and his activities in Northern Ireland, that maybe if there is a political will, then we could actually find a way to develop political relations so that we could be involved in helping develop HTA policy. But I think it is that political will on both sides that would allow us. I think NICE had been previously seen as being at the forefront of HTA appraisals, and I'm just hoping that you know, that knowledge can be utilised, and you know, and that we don't find that the UK is just sitting here as an outlier and acting on our own, like we will be doing with virtually everything else.
Thank you very much. Given the fact and the realities of not being able to implement, of course, such a regulation under the current state of affairs, so to say, knowing, of course, also the NICE's experience, which we often looked at from the point of view of Europe. And also, I would raise, maybe in alternative to other speakers, given this specific difference, I know of the Scottish methodology called SIGN for the development of guidelines, where, of course, patients are involved. How would you see this as a, let's say, as a complementary activity? Because in the end, guidelines are important. Guidelines are important because they help eventually also introduce new treatments or even promote them, because the professional community would often refer to guidelines as, well, now we are advised to do so. And of course, patient voice as being part of the process. How do you see that process? Is it helpful? Is it something that you see as a useful process, or what is your weight in the process?
Well, I think the Scottish Intercollegiate Guidelines Network, which is SIGN, as you're mentioning there, is very forward-thinking. There is a patient network there, which is a virtual group of patients, carers, members of the public, and patient involvement staff from NHS Scotland. And they basically help in sharing issues relevant to patients for each guideline topic. There are guidelines, there are patient versions of the guidelines which translate those guidelines into language that patients can understand. And I know that when I look at the English guidelines for whatever it is, referral for suspected cancer or for treatment of cancer, they are incredibly technically heavy. And I think it's really important that we have an interpretation of guidelines, whether it be for referral, whether it be for treatment, that we have those guidelines translated not just into different languages, but into language that's easy to understand and not so technical. We also need to look at the way that they identify the views of people with lived experience, people like myself who have lived through pancreatic cancer and other cancers, and basically having this partnership with charities and patient organizations is really important, so that the voice of the patient is heard, so that you don't actually have to get individual patients in a room, but an organization like mine can actually be that voice, but we would not do it without our patient cohort. And I think also including things like like focus groups, and for people to discuss, carry out surveys and discuss certain aspects of treatment with those patient groups that are whether disease specific or broader, if they're groups that are supporting patients generally. And also, I think going back to the development of trials, I think getting patient involvement in the development of guidelines is really important, and we fed into a few of those for NICE as well, actually, because they do encourage us to feed in. But you tend to find that the patient view can be a little bit usurped by the technical and clinical views that are very much prevalent. I think one of the innovations is that with Sign, they've developed a patient decision support app as well. So they're really thinking out of the box, which is fantastic. And I think if we are able to have that level of patient involvement in the guideline development, in also the translation of guidelines to a less technical solution, so patients can understand them and they know what they should be entitled to as well within those guidelines, then I think that'd be a very, very good thing. So, it is happening, and it's just a question of not reinventing the wheel, and maybe taking some of the examples from Scotland and elsewhere across the EU where we've got that best practice, and we can actually put that into practice. I am concerned with this EU HTA by the fact that individual member states are still going to be making the economic decisions on these therapies and technologies, because I'm not entirely convinced that these inequalities will go away because the clinical assessments have been made centrally. I still think that we've got, excuse me, I've got a dog that's just come back in. So we do have a problem where you've still got member states who are making those final decisions, and that could have a lasting impact on patient access, and that's something that still needs to be addressed.